He didn't whisper it. He smirked and let it roll out the way kids do when they believe the hallway belongs to them. You ain't smart. The words were small stones pitched at a girl carrying an armful of books, already calculating how to move through a day without attracting a collision. She didn't respond. She had learned too early that arguments only proved the point the bully came to make. But as she turned the corner, past the bulletin board of honor roll names where hers never quite seemed to stay long enough, she felt the bruise of the sentence travel. It wasn't just about one boy or one moment. It was the echo of a whole system telling her to lower her voice, her gaze, her hand. It was the lesson that had followed her from kindergarten. Sit where they put you, show what they expect, and be grateful. The story that followed is what happens when a girl decides not to enroll in other people's expectations. It is a story about the crowded path to excellence, the tactile grind of notebooks smudged with the pressure of determination, the quiet arithmetic of hours stacked on hours until effort becomes fluency. It is about racism that dresses like policy and prejudice that cosplays as fit. It is about the moment, the scales tip, when the data on a page finally outshouts the rumor in a room, and a young woman writes her name at the top of a list no one planned on her reaching. She will not spit back the insult in its original language. She will translate it into a valedictory address. This is what you said. This is what I did. This is how we move forward. The journey starts with 4 syllables tossed like trash and ends with a microphone in her hand, tassel tickling her cheek, a gym full of witnesses learning the proper way to measure a mind. Her mother worked the morning shift at the clinic and the night shift at the kitchen table, where bills spread like a second language and coupons were clipped into neat stacks. Her father drove a truck that stitched the county together, lumberyard to job site to the next town over, his hands cracked and patient, his voice quieter than his size suggested. In their small house, the hallway was a geography lesson, family photos in frames that didn't match, a calendar with birthdays circled in blue ink, a chart of multiplication tables thumbtacked at her eye level, because her mother believed numbers could be learned in passing, the way songs are learned in churches. The neighborhood was a braid, ranch houses with trimmed hedges on one street, peeling paint and fast food wrappers in the grass on the next, pickup trucks idling in convenience store lots at dusk, a school where legacy sat in the front row and hunger in the back. On orientation day, they gave the tour a shine, updated science labs, a library smelling of new carpet and old paper, trophy cases full of victories carefully curated to look like the present instead of the past. But the map under the map, the one students learned by lunch on the first day, was inked differently. It showed where you could sit without being challenged, and which doorways narrowed when you passed. What accelerated meant for some kids and remedial meant for others with identical test scores but different last names, different zip codes inside the same district. Her earliest memory of delight is not a birthday party or a wrapped gift. It is the library. On Saturdays, her mother would take her and linger in the parenting aisle while she wandered to the children's section and pulled down picture books with spines taller than her hand. She learned to read the faces of librarians, who would scan the barcodes like a cashier, and who would lean down and ask what she liked, and then bring her a book as if to confess, "I saved this for you." She learned to shelve the volumes 2 fingers wide apart so she could slip a favorite back out quickly. Learned to balance a stack on her left forearm while turning a page with her right. By 3rd grade, she was a regular at the desk where summer reading lists were stamped complete, and a girl could be praised for the kind of hunger no one would ever try to shame. At home, homework was not an event. It was as expected as teeth brushing. She wrote her words 3 times each, underlined the ones that snagged her tongue, copied down her long division problems with care because her father, who had learned numbers, hauling, and measuring, and not in a classroom, insisted that neatness was a sign of respect for the work. On nights when the power bill made dinner thin, they lit a candle at the table as if by intention, and she saw even then how a room can be made to hold dignity by force of will. She was not the smartest kid she knew, not yet, but she was the one who could remain at the table when other kids fled back to screens or sleep. Stamina became her talent before anyone noticed. 5th grade is the first time a school tells you who it thinks you are, with tables. They call them reading groups, dolphins, eagles. The names are gentle, but the sorting is firm. She was placed at a middle table and told to be grateful. She read ahead anyway. Finished the book the group was assigned a week early, then fussed at her own margin notes for being too obvious. When the teacher found out, she tilted her head like people do when a dog does a trick. Ambitious, she said, in a tone that suggested a different word. The white boy who threw the sentence at her, "You ain't smart," did it in the hallway the day she raised her hand to answer a question. And the teacher, scanning the room like a lighthouse, found a different face to beam at. He said it because he could, because the sentence was a room that always had space for boys like him, because he had learned to read Power long before he could read the novel open on his desk. She had learned to read the weather. She took the hit and kept moving. Middle school made the sorting less coy. Honors track was a path you had to know about to be placed on. The counselor, smiling with the kind of careful professional cheer that suggests a script, suggested she start in regular algebra because honors is a lot. Her mother asked what a lot meant. The counselor explained the workload, then, in a quieter voice, the environment, a word that in this building meant parents with time and expectations and lawyers. Her mother sat up straighter. "We have all three," she said. Naming time is something she would manufacture if she had to. She was accepted into honors biology, and then the first lab partners were chosen by drawing names from a mug. The teacher pulled two boys together whose fathers ran businesses on Main Street, and then, for her, a girl who arrived in class late each day, eyes heavy with the sort of exhaustion homework doesn't cause. Teacher bias lives in size and the way an assignment is handed across a dividing line. She did the lab write-up alone that week, because she had learned not to punish strangers for the systems that had failed them. Still, when the papers came back, the grade at the top was an 89 with the comment, "You need to learn to collaborate." She folded the paper into a square so tight the crease made a white line, and promised herself she would learn to do the impossible. To collaborate with people who were not showing up. There were uglier moments, a group chat that circulated among some of the boys on the basketball team, a string of jokes that named her hair, her nose, her skin, in the language of livestock and shadows. It took a month for a girl she barely knew to show her the screenshots in the bathroom, eyes darting at the door, voice low with apology. She stared at the screen and felt the now familiar sensation of humiliation taking off its coat and settling in for a stay. The administration called the chat unfortunate and inappropriate, and the boys wrote apologies that tasted like paste. The coach suspended 2 players for a game that mattered, and the bleachers booed him as if integrity were an inconvenience. By the time she reached high school, she had 2 skills that did not look like skills from the outside. She knew how to take a punch without turning it into a story that defined her, and she knew how to move between worlds without losing track of herself. Freshman year, the algebra teacher recommended against geometry honors. She smiled, thanked her, and enrolled anyway. Sophomore year, a substitute wrote her up for insubordination because she corrected a mistake on the board too directly. She ate lunch in the library 3 days in a row to avoid the glare of being that girl. Junior year, her English teacher pulled her aside and said, "You have a voice," and she felt the floor under her feet steady. But the counselor returned with the old chorus when it was time to pick APs. "Leave room to breathe. Don't overdo it." She skimmed the course catalog like it was a river map and chose the rock she would step on to reach the far bank. Calculus AB, AP Chem, AP Lang, US History. The counselor blinked. "That's 4. She nodded. Yes. The rumor that she wasn't smart edges into adult voices as raised eyebrows, as gentle deferrals. A teacher says, "I'm not sure this is your lane," meaning, "This lane wasn't built with you in mind." A classmate says, "You're only here because they're trying to diversify," meaning, "Your presence threatens my sense of specialness." At a parent-teacher night, someone asks her mother if they are comfortable with the workload, as if rigor were a privilege granted to families with the right kind of furniture. On the bus, a boy mutters quota, just loud enough for the word to find her ears. She writes it down in the back of her planner next to the day's assignments and underlines it twice, not because it matters, but because she wants to remember how the insult looked in her handwriting. By spring of junior year, the transcripts begin to talk back. Straight A's in courses designed to thin out the herd. Test scores that wobble in places but tell a consistent story. A teacher's recommendation that reads like someone finally saw the movie she had been in for years. The insult from the hallway years ago becomes a fossil. Visible when you brush away the dust, no longer sharp, but proof that something once lived and then died. She built a schedule that looked ridiculous on paper and survivable in practice, up before the sun to read 2 chapters of history while the house was still. Problem sets to work through on the bus. Lunch in the library only on days when the cafeteria felt like a gauntlet. After-school lab. Then a shift at the grocery store, where she bagged groceries with the efficiency of someone who believes time is a thing that can be folded. She turned the margins of her life into flashcards. She taped Latin roots to the mirror. She made her phone a co-conspirator. Alerts that chimed like little bells to remind her to breathe, to stand up, to drink water, to text her best friend back. She found allies and accepted them as gifts instead of miracles. Ms. Clayton in math, stern, surprising, the kind of teacher who will make you redo a problem until you can do it backward, pulled her aside and said, "You can handle BC next year." She believed her before she believed herself. Mr. Amari in chemistry, patient without being permissive, opened the lab for her on Saturdays and let the quiet do the teaching. Coach Rivera, who had seen too many black girls tracked out of the hard classes by people who claimed to be protecting them, slid a list across his desk that read like a supply run. Scholarship deadlines, regional science competitions, girls in STEM meetups, the email address of an alumna who would become a lighthouse. Then there was her mother, who turned their dining table into a war room. They drew calendars in pencil so they could adjust without feeling like failures. They put up a wall of proof, returned essays with comments that finally sounded like respect, quizzes she had won back after asking for a regrade, a note from a librarian who had noticed she'd read through an entire shelf. When a teacher questioned whether her last essay had really been written by her, too good, too fluid, too adult, her mother took a deep breath and said she'd be happy to sit in the room while her daughter wrote another. The teacher backed down with the awkward shuffle of a person caught talking to a stereotype instead of a student. Resistance took the form of data. She and 3 friends formed the kind of study group that looks like gossip and acts like revolution. They kept spreadsheets of their grades, their study hours, their sleep, their moods, noticing patterns, adjusting inputs. They made joint office hour appointments with teachers so they could witness one another's advocacy and learn its cadence. They started study Saturdays at the library, free, open to anyone. Snacks donated by parents who didn't have money but had ovens and love. Freshmen came shyly and stayed because the room felt like a place where you don't have to explain why you want to be excellent. They also collected receipts on the system. They filed Freedom of Information requests for course placement criteria and discovered a fog. Teacher recommendation, holistic review, fit. They wrote a letter to the principal asking for transparent policies, signed by 50 students and 10 parents and 2 teachers who used their tenure the way it was meant to be used. They presented to the school board, her voice shaking only at the beginning, about how 9th grade tracking hardens into 12th grade ceilings. They didn't call anyone racist. They called the architecture of the building crooked. The district formed a committee, which is what districts do to avoid change. They joined it and refused to let the minutes be the end of the action. Not every day was noble. There were messy arguments and an almost friendship that soured over a boy who wasn't worth a text. There was the time she fell asleep in class and woke to a whisper that sounded like ghetto, and she had to decide whether to launch herself into a fight or into a better plan. There was a Saturday she spent crying at the kitchen table over integrals that refused to yield, and her mother slid a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her and said, "Gently try again. After you eat." There was the college fair, where a recruiter avoided her table until Miss Clayton physically waved him over and introduced her as top of my class, and he blinked like someone emerging from a cave. The hardest part of resistance was believing that the hill she was climbing led somewhere. She kept a list titled, "Reasons to Keep Going." Several were silly, I like new highlighters. Many were holy. my little cousin's eyes when I tell her a story, and one was the truest sentence she'd ever written to herself, because I deserve the version of me that emerges on the other side of this work. Senior spring, the rumor mill accelerated, as if gossip were the school's official sport. The rank list would be finalized after midterms. People who had never spoken to her began to say hello in the hallway, as if greetings could change averages. The boy who had once said, "You ain't smart," older now, softer around the edges of his meanness, passed her a calculator in AP Stats when hers died and said, "You left your charger in lab." She accepted it like an apology. Then the counselor called her in to discuss options, scholarships, essays. She sat upright in the cracked vinyl chair while the counselor talked about fit again and manageability and a set of reach and target schools that were a perfect match for your profile. She nodded politely and left, then went to Ms. Clayton, who circled the names they agreed on with firm pen strokes. Bold. She added 2 more just because they were favorite dreams. Bolder. She wrote her essays at the dining table with the TV low, her mother laughing now and then at a sitcom. The ordinary world cushioning the extraordinary care she took to choose words that revealed the shape of her mind, without performing tragedy for admissions officers. She did not write about the hallway insult. She wrote about the library and the lab, and the way hard problems teach humility before they teach anything else. The day the GPA announcement arrived, it was a white envelope posted to the office door. She stood with a small crowd, her heart pushing against her ribs. The list was alphabetical, not ranked. For a moment she thought it had all been a cruel misdirection. Then she saw the second page, the line that said, "Valedictorian," her name. There was a second of silence in her head, a pause so complete it felt like a new organ. Then sound rushed back, the rustling of paper, the thump of her own pulse, someone softly saying, "Yes," as if on her behalf. The first congratulations came from the librarian, who appeared out of nowhere the way librarians do, when the world tilts and need rises from the floor like fog. The second came from Coach Rivera, who hugged her in a one-armed coach way that broke into a two-armed chokehold for a half-second before he remembered he was at work. The third came from a boy on the basketball team who said, "You earned it," in a tone that sounded like he'd just discovered a fact. The speech became the next battlefield. The principal, skittish after a season of controversy over student remarks on race, asked to review her draft. She handed it over, carefully titled and paginated. He returned with notes that turned verbs passive and politics into platitudes. She took it home and cried because she knew this fight was bigger than a mic. Her mother listened, then asked the now familiar question that always changed the room. "What do you want to say?" She rewrote. She kept the names out and the meaning in. She described a school as a house with rooms some students are told they don't need to see. She talked about doors that look locked because no one ever tries the handle. She thanked teachers by describing the exact sentence each had once said to her that shifted something permanent in her. She told a story about her grandmother ironing clothes while telling math puzzles, numbers wrapped in steam and faith. She told the seniors that their job was to build rooms bigger than the ones they had been assigned, not just for themselves, but for all the people coming behind. When she practiced in the living room, her mother didn't clap. She stood. They both cried and then laughed because that combination had become, by then, their way of confirming that they had done something right. Graduation day smelled like sunscreen and carnations. The gym's air conditioning struggled against 1,000 bodies. She walked to the podium with notes in her hand and an entire childhood in her chest. She saw faces. Her father sitting straight-backed as if posture could pray. Ms. Clayton with a look that said, "I told you." The principal over by the curtain, a little pale. She began, voice steady. As she spoke, murmurs rose. Agreement, surprise, the soft O of recognition when a truth meets its listener head-on. She did not say the sentence that started this story. She did not need to. Everyone in the room had heard some version of it at some point in their lives, spoken to them, or about someone they loved. She ended with a promise. We will be the generation that opens doors and holds them, that hands down keys and never asks a child to shrink to fit a room meant to expand. The applause was not polite. It rose like weather, It was the sound of a community catching up to the person they had been lucky enough to raise. The week after graduation, she delivered her cap and gown to the dry cleaner because her mother wanted to keep it in good condition for the next one. She worked at the grocery store to stack a cushion for fall. A letter arrived with embossed edges and a seal that looked more permanent than paper should be. Full scholarship. She screamed and then caught the sound with her hands as if to save it. Summer was a long corridor of goodbyes and preparations. She made a checklist that included small things, laundry bag, shower caddy, and important ones, copies of transcripts, a notebook labeled New Math. She joined the freshman group chat and watched questions scroll by. Where do we get ID cards? Is calc as hard as they say? And the old soreness of being new returned. She answered the ones she could. Bring a sweater to the library. They keep it too cold. In college, the lecture halls were amphitheaters of possibility. She learned to draw knowledge out of professors like water from a pump, primed, then flowing. She learned to say, "I don't understand," out loud, and discovered that the bravest students were not always the ones with the highest scores, but the ones with the most curiosity. She joined a student group that tutored local high schoolers on Saturdays, and when the coordinator asked if anyone could design a session on study skills, she smiled. She could teach a masterclass on persistence. She came home for winter break and visited her old school with a bag of donuts and a sign-in at the front office that still smelled like lemon cleaner and paper. She sat in Ms. Clayton's room and told the current BC class about the trick of writing the same problem 3 ways to make the brain bend, about the way sleep matters more than one extra problem set, about how to request a regrade without making the teacher your adversary. She saw herself in a girl in the second row, who watched her with a steady intensity that felt familiar. After the bell, the girl approached and said quietly, "I didn't know I could do this until I saw you." She wrote her number on the girl's notebook and underlined it twice. Back at college, she took a course called Education Policy and the American City and recognized her life in the readings, the dry language of studies trying to measure the unmeasurable, what it takes for a child to push past a wall. She wrote her final paper on tracking and transparency and included a page of recommendations that read like a list of demands disguised as common sense. Publish criteria. Eliminate vague words like fit. Evaluate teacher recommendations for bias. Audit outcomes by race and class and act on the findings. She sent it to her principal with a note. For the committee. He wrote back with a single sentence that surprised her. We're implementing 3 of these next fall. Her brother, 3 years younger, entered 9th grade that same fall. Algebra was untracked for the first time in the school's history. Everyone in the same class with extra support built in and a chance to move faster if ready. He texted her a photo of the textbook's first page and a message that read, "Feels like they expect me to be good at this." She put her phone down and cried on her dorm bed, a small private mourning for the years that could have been easier and a gladness that someone else's will be. The sentence that started this story, "You ain't smart," was an attempt to draw a small circle and force a life to fit inside it. What she did, with grit and grace and data and laughter and a stubborn refusal to shrink, was to redraw the circle until it became a table, and then pull up more chairs. Her journey reminds us that racism in schools rarely announces itself with a bullhorn. It slips in as advice, as standards, as just how we do things here. It thrives in policies too vague to be challenged, and rooms where no one asks to see the receipts. It is dismantled by persistence that knows how to smile and how to insist. If you teach, your power is larger than your lesson plan. It lives in your recommendations and your seating charts, and the sentences you tuck into a student's ear that they will hear every time they walk into a new room. If you counsel, make the word fit mean faith in. If you lead, turn committees into commitments and minutes into policy. If you parent, turn your kitchen table into a command center and your voice into the mirror your child uses when the world's reflection wobbles. If you are a student, especially if you are the student they didn't design the room for, know this: you are the architect now. On graduation day, she didn't repeat the insult to score a rhetorical point. She did something harder. She told the truth about a house and the rooms in it, and then handed out keys. The work continues. The doors do not hold themselves. But somewhere a girl sits at a library table with a stack of books and a planner full of deadlines and a glowing, improbable fact brightening her page. Valedictorian, her name. And the old sentence, 4 brittle syllables, finally cracks under the weight of the life built above it.